State coups. How many times have you heard about state coups or coups? I think you've lost count, haven't you? Even in Italy, we often hear about state coups, but not only referring to foreign states. We in Italy have risked suffering more than one state coup. The first time this term or the equivalent coup was used was in the early 60s, when another term, the clanging of sabers, became the scarecrow, the bogeyman of a coup. Today, with this video, we go straight to the heart of the original story, to the birth of Italian fear, of coup, to the birth of that noise, the clanging of sabers. Today we go back to the times of the plan. Only this term, or the equivalent coup, was at the beginning of the 60s, when another term. August 7, 1964. We are at the Quirinale, the residence of the head of state, President of the Republic. There is a very heavy atmosphere. The looks are suspicious. You can even hear screams. Something unusual for an environment where etiquette, protocol, rules. The late afternoon of August 7, 1964, is scheduled for the meeting of the head of state with the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister. But it's not a friendly meeting at all. What should be just a formal reception turns into a disastrous argument. In those days, at the Quirinale, the president is Antonio Segni. He is a resolute man, a man from the most Altanist wing of the Christian democracy, a man used to being obeyed. And the clerks of the Quirinale almost jump when they hear him yell, "Homoiosis," addressing the president like that, "How dare you?" What silence, a deafening silence, a silence that scares. Antonio Segni was yelling at Giuseppe Saraga, the foreign minister. The head of state suddenly collapses, pale and speechless, unable to utter a word. Aldo Moro, the prime minister, who was present at the meeting, rushes out of the hall, calls the staff, asks for help, call a doctor. Signs he has just been hit by cerebral thrombosis, a stroke, a disease in which the signs had already been noticed, but underestimated. In the previous days, it was seen that Segni was not well, but that apoplectic stroke will end Segni's career. But above all, he will manage to reveal the background of something very murky. 1964. It was called the hot summer. Very hot, not for meteorological reasons. It is during that period that the jingling of Shamali is heard, especially in the corridors of the ministries, and above all, at the Quirinale. On June 25, 1964, the first Moro government fell after a vote against increasing funds for private schools. From that moment on, the situation spirals towards the abyss. Italian democracy is squeezed between palace interests, conservative pushes, and Confindustria's very right-wing ideas. The same signs and the reactionary nostalgia of a good part of the armed forces, which in the end have official acts, largely from the fascist past. The direct interpreter of those difficult weeks is Spiracchio. Within the political world, it's an official act. Hard face underscored by a mustache and the eternal monocle on the right eye. He is a former partisan who has already made a name for himself, perhaps even too much. A man named Giovanni de Lorenzo, a monarchist, son of an artillery officer, Giovanni de Lorenzo has built his own military curriculum. First in Ukraine, following the Armyr during the Second World War, where he was the deputy head of the operations office until his repatriation. Then, as a partisan, a member of the National Liberation Committee, on behalf of which he played a crucial role in Nazi-occupied Rome. After the war, his past as a partisan was decidedly favorable in the transition from the Kingdom of Italy to the Italian Republic. In 1955, he became the director of Servizio Informazioni Forze Armate, appointed as a brigadier general. He ends up leading the Armed Forces Training Service, which took the place of the old and ramshackle Servizio Informazioni Forze Armate. To delve into all the acronyms and transitions of the Italian Secret Services, you can find a video on this channel. De Lorenzo proves to be a skilled weaver, a weaver of plots, though, so much so that he maintains relationships with the President of the Republic, Giovanni Gronchi, but also with those who will be defined as the state boyars, starting with Enrico Mattei, a man who had shared with him the experience of the partisan struggle, and who was becoming increasingly powerful at the helm of Ley. We have already dealt with Mattei as well. With these strong political supports, even from the left, since De Lorenzo is directly supported by the Italian Socialist Party, well, the general launches an illegal operation, the mass registration of Italian society. In 7 years, his spies collect dossier after dossier in which the folders end up with everything. Men, politicians, entrepreneurs, generals, admirals, journalists, executives, union leaders, priests, teachers, academics, students. Just play a role, even just a suspected one, and you end up in there. And what's in there? Daily life information, habits, manias, contacts, directories. Maybe even some vice or some weakness, something that can be useful for blackmail, the worst of the worst. For De Lorenzo, this was unsurprising. It's part of the state's defense, according to him. Too bad it's a violation of the basic rights of the person, as well as a possible blackmail weapon. So the Parliament, with a special commission, decrees the end of the registration operation and that everything that has been collected ends up in the shredder. Over the years, it will then be discovered that those files have never been, at least all, destroyed. Many of these will then be brought as a dowry by De Lorenzo's successors to the mattress maker, to the man from Pistoia, Alice O'Garty. But that's another story. Let's go back to De Lorenzo, who has weathered the storm of the dossiers and can still count on the usual political support. In October 1962, he moved from the desk of Servizio Informazioni Forze Armate to the position of General Commander of the Carabinieri, a position of prestige and responsibility. The Carabinieri is not just a public order force present in every corner of the country, but in essence it is a military department and organized into 3 territorially based divisions. And it is De Lorenzo who gives a strong military boost to the Carabinieri, convincing the new head of state, Antonio Segni, to give him the green light for a decisive modernization of the force. At least he calls it modernization. What does it mean? It means that from that moment on, the Carabinieri are equipped with a parachute department, the Tuscania Battalion, and an entire mechanized brigade, the 11th. But it's not an army unit, it's a Carabinieri unit, a Praetorian Guard equipped with Patton M48 tanks. Can you imagine the Carabinieri with tanks? This novelty is presented in Pompapagna on June 14, 1964, a few days before the fall of the government, during an event organized at the Urbe airport. President Segni is moved, almost touched, and he stands at attention while saluting the tank commanders. The Italian press is more skeptical, as the Carabinieri were previously viewed as the nation's police force. A Carabinieri stationed in every inhabited center throughout Italy. A representative of the foreign press, for example, asked De Lorenzo a question that should give pause for thought. He asked the general if from now on the police and Carabinieri will be hunting thieves using tanks. The general does not respond. This provocative question suggests that change is occurring or a potential risk is emerging. The trouble is that many politicians want to ignore the risk, but the risk is real. In the previous weeks, that parade has fueled Segni's anti-communist paranoia. He began to hint at the existence of communist or Soviet fifth columns, of a backlash from the Italian Communist Party that could seize power violently, or general strikes by unions to paralyze the country. In short, De Lorenzo essentially scares Segni. He makes him believe that the only way and the only tool to oppose a communist coup, or even worse, supported by Tito in Belgrade or Pruscioffo in Moscow, it would be to turn to the generals, rather to a specific general, him. De Lorenzo doesn't even trust Segni with the Americans. He didn't have a good relationship with Kennedy, and he doesn't trust Johnson. De Lorenzo. He proposes a new plan, summoning the commanders of the 3 Carabinieri divisions distributed across the territory. The Pastrengo based in Milan, the Podgora based in Rome, the Ogaden based in Naples. He entrusts these commanders with the task of drafting the operational intervention plan to change the fate of the country. It will be called a plan simply because it only includes the Carabinieri's weapon. No other military personnel will have to participate. The first plan's beaten haphazardly by the senior assistants of the 3 commanders, and among these senior assistants we even find Romolo della Chiesa, the brother of Carlo Alberto dalla Chiesa. They anticipate the RAI occupation in Vietola Daru and garrisoning of the nation's vital areas. The arrest of 700 people called enucleators, who are defined as dangerous to public order and who will have to be transferred by plane to a base in Sardinia. On May 10, 1964, that is, a month before the parade and a month and a half before the fall of the government, De Lorenzo presents the draft of the Czech plan and accepts it. After the parade, both the 11th Mechanized Brigade and the paratrooper Carabinieri remain in Rome. They are not sent back to their respective barracks. The excuse is that, for a logistical reason, some details of the organization of the Arma after the care of the Oreo still need to be arranged. In reality, these units, many of them, are kept in Rome in case the imminent government crisis does not lead to anything good. After the Moro government's fall, Segni responds decisively, perhaps excessively, with strong measures. His first goal is to immediately archive what has become known as the first episode of center-left in Italy. Does he want to shift the executive's axis to the right? In essence, he wants to give the task to the president of the Senate, Cesare Merzagora, so that he can form a government of technicians. Welcome! Both the more conservative part of the Christian democracy and Confindustria and the military, Aldo Moro senses the risk, says that something too big is at stake. Italian democracy remains young and fragile. The country, just 4 years earlier, had reacted vigorously to Tambroni's attempt to launch a government shifted to the right. There were street riots, there were deaths. We cannot risk a civil war or a military dictatorship. When Segni, during the consultations, is found at the Quirinale in the company of De Lorenzo, then that clinking of Sciamoli is no longer a ghost. It's something present at the breath of the head of state, is something alarming. For this reason, Nero quickly manages to convince the socialist secretary Nenni to give birth to a new executive, always center-left. He blocks Merzagora's aspirations, blocks Lorenzo's coup projects, and gives a displeasure to Segni, whose health is already undermined by the products of the stroke. Segni does not react well. In early August, he is restless. The sniper parliament openly accuses him of surrendering to Moro, in practice of being weak. Zagora no longer wants involvement. De Lorenzo deactivated the Piano Soro and sent his men back to the barracks. And to the commanders of the Carabinieri division, he essentially said that the emergency, or rather the threat, did not materialize. Everything is at home. Even Randolfo Pacciardi, another partisan leader, refuses to get involved. Segni remains with only one card in hand to put pressure on Love, is a psychological card. It is a card made of continuous jabs. On August 6, Moro holds the confidence of the chamber, then he holds it in the Senate and can launch his second government. However, Segni is not at all satisfied. He first wants the press, especially the socialist one, to start with Levanti. Apologize to him. Why? Levanti had accused him with full-page headlines of institutional misconduct. Nenni, however, doesn't want to know. Apologize with signs Moro never even intends to address the issue. And Segni also finds himself alone, increasingly angry and more determined to confront Moro. On August 7, we return to the afternoon meeting with Moro and Saragat, the foreign minister. Segni decides to play his heaviest card, Danmas. There are nominations at stake, diplomatic nominations. The heaviest chair is that of ambassador to Moscow, a position for which Segni's favorite, namely his advisor, Federico Sensi, has been excluded. While in the deck there is the name of Giovanni Saragat, the son of the foreign minister. Using that card, Segni declares war on Saragat. He starts telling him, I respect the Republic. I don't take advantage of the Republic. In practice, Segni wants to accuse his opponent, nepotism, of having used his position at the Farnesina to advance his son's career. Saragat won't stand for it anymore. He's had enough. He doesn't want to take it anymore, and he brings out what he's kept inside himself for too long. He retorts, You would respect the Republic and the dangers you made us run in the government crisis. Government. Your plots with the Carabinieri, what are those? Segni, he can't control himself anymore. His hand starts to shake, and then both. His voice tone starts to scream. Even the clerks and valets in the other rooms can hear it. He feels offended until, after uttering those words, "How dare you?" Chroma lictus hits him. Help is rushed in and the president receives emergency care. They inject him with anticoagulants, Tubano. They try to stabilize his condition. However, Segni can no longer speak. He doesn't move. He seems like a vegetable. Moro, after calling for help, locks himself in his study and vents to his secretary. Guerzoni says he would never have expected a scene like this. Saragat goes to inform the Council of Ministers. Then he locks himself in his office and faints, exhausted from the tension. Press releases are produced. They try to minimize. It is said that the president had a minor too much and is no longer in a condition to exercise his functions for a certain period. Merzagara is recalled from Barcelona because he must assume the interim charge for the emergency provided by the Constitution. De Lorenzo himself, who is in Fiuchi to spend the waters on a thermal holiday, urgently returns to Rome. It almost seems ironic that while the tragedy at the Quirinale was unfolding, the editorial staff of Dati had already decided to publish an editorial for the next day, to apologize to Segni and downsize the accusations made previously. Segni, however, will never get satisfaction. He will never recover from that stroke. On August 16, 9 days later, a priest gives him the last rites with fear he could die at any moment. His medical condition will slowly stabilize. But in December, signing with his left hand, as his right hand is now paralyzed, Segni will be forced to resign. He will die in 1972. He will be succeeded, not without surprises, and with a good dose of irony, by Saraga, who will manage to beat the competition of Leone and Fanfari, the latter sponsored by the military, and by Cephas, the Grand Commissioner of Ini. We have already talked about him too. As for General De Lorenzo, he too will leave the force after a while, but only to engage in a long-distance fight with his old enemy from the army, General Giuseppe Arroya. Between daring courses, commissions for new armaments of the Seafaring Seed Organization, some dark episodes such as the alleged suicide of Colonel Roca, episodes of a long war that punctuate the high ranks of the army and services. To discover what had really happened and what Italy had really risked in those days, two journalists, Scalfari and Januzzi, both later referred to trial and convicted of defamation against the armed forces, will be. De Lorenzo's military career, however, will end in an inglorious way with a dismissal, then starting a brief parliamentary interlude until his death, which occurred in 1973. Today, the name of Giovanni de Lorenzo remains shrouded in the clothes of the coup plotter, of the man who exploited his extensive political knowledge, not only for his power ambitions, and risking dragging all of Italy into a dark, gloomy, and brutal dictatorship. Luckily, things turned out differently for men like Moro Leni and others like them. They were able to find the right balance to break the risk, to give the country a glimmer of democracy. Fortunately, but sometimes it's just a matter of details within the big circus of history to make the difference between a democratic development and an authoritarian turn. Thank you all.